I paid every medical bill alone, then watched them cry when the inheritance skipped their names. Why is Grandma not invited to the party? Bella's voice was soft, barely rising above the sound of her mother's heels pacing the living room. Her mother, still adjusting her pearl earrings in the mirror, barely glanced down. Because she is tired, Bella. Old people get overwhelmed, and let's be honest, she would just sit there looking all frail and awkward. This is a celebration. It needs to feel uplifting. But I thought the party was for her, Bella whispered, confused. It is, her mother replied curtly, smoothing down the hem of her dress. But we are doing it for her, not with her. Now go, put on your shoes. Guests will be arriving soon, and I do not want you running around asking silly questions. In the kitchen, behind the thin wall of plasterboard, Emma stood frozen, with a plate of freshly washed fruit trembling in her hands. Her back was to the doorway, her shoulders stiffened as the words landed one by one, each heavier than the last. She set the plate down gently on the counter and reached for a towel, pretending to wipe her hands though they were already dry. She did not say a word. She never did. The house bustled with movement. Floral centerpieces were arranged on the patio table. Waiters unloaded boxes of wine and tiered cakes. The family portrait from 10 years ago, the last time everyone had posed together without pretense, was pulled from the hallway and displayed near the buffet. But nowhere was there a chair set aside for her. At noon, music began to fill the backyard. Laughter rang out. People she had not seen in decades arrived in shiny cars, bearing gift bags and flattery. Emma peeked through the lace curtain. She recognized some faces, aged and heavier, smiling with the effortlessness of people who had long stopped caring who they hurt. In the dining room, she spooned out some plain rice, porridge into a chipped bowl. The other dishes were too greasy, too rich for her stomach now. She sat at the end of the table, alone, next to a potted plant someone had left on the seat meant for her. No one noticed. As she ate, she listened to the toasts being given outside. One son praised his mother, her daughter, for being the most generous, spirited woman I know. Another described her as the glue of our family. There were claps and cheers. Someone popped champagne. No one mentioned her. The cake was 6 layers high, a garish pink and gold monument of sugary pride. Bella, dressed in a frilly white dress she did not like, sat with her plate untouched. Her eyes darted toward the house, toward the curtained window where she had seen her grandmother's face just minutes ago. When the adults were distracted, she slipped inside. The house felt too quiet compared to the noise outside. She tiptoed down the hallway and pushed open the bedroom door. Emma sat on the edge of her bed, her small hands folded over her lap. The bowl of porridge was empty on the nightstand. She looked up when Bella entered and quickly wiped her eyes. "I brought this," Bella said, lifting a paper napkin carefully folded around a small slice of cake. "I saved it for you." Emma took the bundle with both hands, as if it were made of glass. "Thank you, my sweet girl," she said softly. "I am sorry, Grandma. I thought the party was for you." Emma smiled, a curve of lips but not of eyes. "So did I," she whispered. Bella hesitated, then reached into her small handbag and pulled out a birthday card she had made herself. It was drawn in crayon, a slightly wobbly heart on the front. Inside it read, "Happy birthday, Grandma. You are my favorite person." Emma read it once, then again. She closed it slowly and pressed it against her chest. "You remembered," she said, her voice catching. "Of course I did." The silence that followed was different from the rest. It was not cold or awkward. It was full, like the space between heartbeats when you realize someone still sees you. Outside, the laughter roared on, the music grew louder, and more champagne was poured. But inside that quiet bedroom, with a slice of cake and a crayon-drawn card, a different kind of celebration took place. One that no camera would capture, no guest would acknowledge, and no child except Bella would understand. That night, long after the last car had driven away and the music had stopped, Emma sat on the edge of her bed with the card in her hand. She did not cry, but her chest ached with something heavy and quiet, something that felt like grief and gratitude and the beginning of an ending. When Emma was 35, her husband fell from a ladder while painting the roof. He broke his hip and 3 ribs. The recovery took months. She paid every hospital bill out of her modest savings and never once asked her children for help. At the time, they were still young, still full of needs and excuses. "You know we're trying to start our lives, Mom," her eldest son had said. "You can handle this, right?" And she could. She always could. When her daughter failed her second year in college and lost her scholarship, Emma cashed in an old insurance policy to cover the tuition. When her youngest got divorced and was left with nothing but debt, Emma quietly took out a loan in her name and paid off his ex-wife's threats. When her oldest son's restaurant went under, she remortgaged her own home to help him keep the lights on. "Just until I get back on my feet," he promised. That was 10 years ago. They always promised. Now she was 70, and the fatigue came differently. It lived in her bones, nested behind her ribs, grew roots behind her eyes. The coughing had started slowly, just a tickle here and there. Then came the tightness in her chest. She could not walk to the mailbox without stopping for breath. She had texted her daughter one morning, "I'm tired, a little short of breath." The reply came 3 hours later, a single emoji, like. She stared at the screen for a long time. Then she tucked the phone under her pillow and went back to bed. That evening she called a taxi to take her to the clinic. It was a quiet, no-frills place downtown where they asked for cash up front. She paid $120.00 for the ride and $300.00 for medication. She wrote it down in her old spiral notebook when she got home. Clinic, taxi, $120.00. Self. Prescription, $300.00. Self. Lunch, $12.00. Self. Chicken porridge. She had started that notebook years ago, first to track grocery expenses. Now it had become a diary of silent transactions, each line a reminder of what she had done for others and what she now had to do for herself. A week later, the coughing worsened. She called her youngest son. "Hey, Mom, can I call you later? I'm in a meeting." "That's fine, Click. The call ended. She called a neighbor instead. No answer. So she dressed slowly, put on her thick socks, and walked to the main road. The sun was too bright that day. Her vision swam. A few steps from the bus stop, her legs gave out. She did not remember falling, only the cold of the concrete on her cheek, and then the sound of someone shouting her name, though she did not recognize the voice. When she opened her eyes, she was in a hospital bed. A woman sat beside her, brown hair in a ponytail, uniform wrinkled from hours of wear. She looked barely older than Bella. "You're awake," the woman said, smiling. "I'm Emily. You fainted near the pharmacy. I was getting coffee and saw you go down." Emma tried to speak, but her mouth was dry. "Do not worry," Emily added gently. "You're safe now." Over the next 2 days, Emily visited her on every break. She brought Emma warm broth, fluffed her pillows, even clipped her nails when she noticed they were too long. "You remind me of my grandmother," Emily said once, laughing softly. "She was tough, too." On the 3rd day, a young man walked in during the afternoon rounds. He wore a white coat and glasses, a tired kindness behind his smile. "Mrs. Kingston," he said, checking her chart. "I'm Dr. Miller. You gave us quite a scare." Did someone call my children?" she asked, voice hoarse. Emily looked down. "We did," Dr. Miller said gently. "No one answered. We left messages." Emma nodded slowly. "They must be busy." The words tasted bitter. That night, after the hospital lights dimmed and the hallway quieted, she opened her notebook again. ER intake, $90.00. Self. IV antibiotics, $480.00. Self. Taxi home estimate, $100.00. Self. She stared at the last line and let her pen fall. Her hand ached. Her heart ached more. Emily returned quietly, setting a small heater near the foot of the bed. "It gets cold at night in this ward," she said softly. "Just for you, okay?" Emma looked at her. "Why are you so kind?" Emily blinked. "Because someone should be." The next morning, a nurse came in holding flowers. "From your daughter," she announced. Emma's eyes widened, but then narrowed. She opened the card tucked among the lilies. It was blank, not even a name, just flowers, like an obligation. When her daughter finally did call, 3 days after Emma was discharged, she said, "Sorry, Mom, I was tied up with the party." "Everything okay now?" Emma looked out the window, watching Emily help an elderly man adjust his blanket in the courtyard below. "Yes," she said. "Everything is fine." She ended the call before her daughter could ask for anything else. Weeks passed. The cough returned, stronger now, but Emma did not call anyone. She walked slowly to her cabinet, pulled out her notebook and wrote, "This time, I will not record the cost, only the silence." And underneath that, in neat handwriting, "Emily, remember her." Emily had a way of entering a room without making noise but leaving behind a warmth that lingered. Every evening at 7:30, she would come into Emma's hospital room carrying a dog-eared copy of an old book, Anne of Green Gables, and a small thermos of herbal tea. "Chapter 5 tonight," she said one evening, settling beside the bed. Emma turned her head, her breathing labored. "That girl, she talks too much." Emily smiled. "She reminds me of Bella. Bright, a little stubborn. I was like that once," Emma murmured. "You still are," Emily replied gently and opened the book. She read aloud with the patience of someone who was not in a hurry to be anywhere else. Emma listened, eyes closed, as Emily's voice painted scenes of fields and red rooftops and kindred spirits. It reminded her of a life that once had color. Miller was different, quieter, more methodical. He had the air of a man who had seen too much too soon. Young, maybe 32 at most, but with shoulders that carried the weight of many unspoken things. He reviewed Emma's chart twice a day, not because it was required, but because he wanted to be sure. "She missed her 9 p.m. dose again," he said one night, frowning. "She was asleep," the attending nurse replied. Miller sighed. "Then wake her. It matters." He adjusted her medication himself and began scheduling his breaks to align with Emma's needs. No one asked him to. He just did. One afternoon, Emma woke up from a nap to find him sitting by the window, scribbling something into a small notebook. "What are you writing?" she asked, voice raspy. He looked up, startled. "Just thoughts, notes about patients, stories, I guess." She nodded. "Don't forget to write mine," he smiled. "I already have, page 27. Emma chuckled weakly. "I hope I'm a good character." He met her gaze. "You're the one that stays with the reader." Days passed like that, quiet, slow, intimate in the way that only sickness and silence can be. Emily massaged her hands, filed her nails, brushed her thinning hair. Miller made sure no dose was missed, no symptom ignored. They did not hover. They were simply present. But not everyone saw it that way. One Monday afternoon, the door swung open with a force that rattled the IV stand. It was Linda, Emma's eldest daughter. She wore a tight suit and too much perfume, and her heels clicked sharply on the tile as she marched in. "What is this?" she snapped, eyes narrowing at Emily, who was gently feeding Emma a spoonful of soup. Emily stood slowly, napkin in hand. She was having trouble swallowing. I know what I saw," Linda interrupted. "This is inappropriate. She's not a child. She's not your charity case." "Linda," Emma said softly, "she's helping me." "I can see that," Linda snapped, turning now to Emily. "What do you want, huh? Hoping for a mention in the will? You think spoon-feeding her gets you a piece of the inheritance?" Emily's hands trembled slightly, but she kept her voice even. "I am just doing my job, ma'am." "Well, your job is crossing the line." Before Emily could respond, Dr. Miller stepped in. "Miss Kingston, may I speak with you outside?" Linda turned, bristling. "Are you part of this too? I am her physician, and I can assure you that everything being done here is in the best interest of your mother." "Then you better start documenting it," Linda hissed, "because I'm calling hospital administration." The room felt 10 degrees colder after she left. Emily sat down slowly, her hands folded on her lap, silent. "I'm sorry," Emma whispered. "She wasn't always like that." Emily shook her head. "It's okay. I've been yelled at before. But not like this." Emily looked at her, eyes soft. "No, not like this." The next day, a formal complaint was filed. The hospital's administration summoned both Emily and Dr. Miller for review. The claim, excessive personal involvement with a patient. "She reads to me," Emma told the social worker. "That's not excessive, that's human." Still, protocols required investigation. "Should we stop?" Emily asked Miller outside the nurse's station. "No," he replied. "They can question our motives, but not our integrity." They both signed written statements. Miller provided his notes, dates, times, and medication logs. Emily listed every task she had done, each of them under standard care. The hospital chose not to pursue disciplinary action, but the shadow of suspicion lingered. Some nurses pulled away. Others whispered. Emily noticed the shift, but said nothing. Miller, too, became more reserved in the halls, but neither left. They kept showing up. Emily brought new books. Miller adjusted doses. They remained at Emma's side, not because they were saints, but because they believed someone had to stay. One night, Emma asked, "Why do you keep coming back?" Emily sat at the edge of the bed, brushing a loose hair from Emma's brow. "Because love doesn't always come from family," she said. "Sometimes it comes from those who see you when others stop looking." Dr. Miller came in just after. "Vitals stable," he said, glancing at the monitor. "Even with all the drama," Emily joked. He smiled faintly. "Even with all the drama." Emma closed her eyes, her breath a little easier than the day before. For the first time in weeks, she felt something close to peace. In a world where she had been discarded by her own blood, these two strangers had remained. Not because they were paid, not because they wanted anything, but because kindness, real kindness, is its own reason, and in the end that made all the difference. The hallway light cast a pale glow under the door, and Emma blinked into the dark. Her chest felt tight again, not from sickness this time, but from something heavier. Loneliness, maybe. Realization. A grief not for death, but for life unloved. She sat up slowly, clutching the blanket around her thin shoulders, and reached for the phone beside her bed. Her fingers trembled as she dialed the number from memory. It rang twice before a voice, warm and precise, answered. "Miss Kingston?" came the voice of Mr. Alden, her lawyer for nearly 20 years. "I am awake," she whispered, "and I have something I need to do before I die." A long pause. "Tell me. I want to rewrite the will." She could hear his chair creak as he sat up. "All right. Do you want to disperse by bloodline or asset?" "Neither," she said. Her voice grew steadier, stronger. "I want to divide it by memory, by action, by who was there when I could not lift a spoon." There was a silence on the other end. Then, simply, "Understood." She laid it out clearly. 70% to a medical charity, anyone who provides care for the elderly forgotten by their children. Which one? You choose. Just make sure they do what my family never did. Yes. 10% to the nurse, Emily. Full name, Emily Tyler. She is not just a nurse. She is a good human being. Done. 10% to Dr. Miller. He does not smile often, but he carries kindness like a second spine. Alden hesitated. And the rest? Emma turned, opened the drawer beside her bed, and pulled out a letter she had written 3 days earlier, folded 3 times, sealed with careful tape. Her handwriting on the front. To Bella, on her 18th birthday. "There is one more person," she said quietly, "but she must not know until she is old enough to understand why secrets protect the softest hearts. I see," voice gentler now. "Your granddaughter." "Yes, Bella is different. She notices small things. She brought me cake when no one remembered. She visited without asking permission. She whispered, 'I love you,' even if Mom gets mad." "And you want this kept secret?" "Completely. Keep the envelope sealed. Do not mention it in the public will. She must never be punished for caring." There was a pause again, then the creak of Alden's pen scratching paper. "Understood. That makes the total 100% accounted for." "Yes. Miss Kingston, Emma, I have to tell you, this may not be received well. There will be backlash. Your children, they may call you cold." She smiled, though he could not see it. "I am not cold. I am just done pretending. And truth, real truth, never asks for applause." He sighed. "That may be the wisest thing you've ever said." "No, the wisest thing I ever did," she corrected, "was to stop giving out forgiveness like candy." When she hung up, she held the letter to Bella in her lap. It was not long, just a few words, a little hope, and a promise. "You are not like them. Keep being you. This is for the day you need to leave without asking anyone's permission." She closed her eyes and leaned back into the pillow. For the first time in many weeks, she did not feel anxious. The fear that had clung to her, the fear of being forgotten, had finally loosened its grip. She would be remembered, not because of the size of her bank account, but because she had loved one child honestly, thanked 2 strangers fiercely, and refused to reward betrayal one more time. In the quiet of the night, as the world spun without noticing her decision, Emma made peace with every dollar she ever spent alone, every hospital visit she endured in silence, every moment she had felt invisible in her own bloodline. The will had been rewritten, the truth was set, and her story was no longer theirs to tell. The music was loud enough to rattle the windows. Through the thin walls of her room, Emma could hear the echo of bass, laughter, and clinking glasses coming from the backyard just 2 houses away. The celebration had begun. She sat on the edge of her bed, clutching her old phone in both hands. The screen flickered occasionally, dim from years of wear. She opened the livestream link Bella had quietly sent her earlier. It was titled, "Happy 70th, Mom." The irony did not go unnoticed. The image wavered for a second, then cleared. Emma saw her daughter, dressed in a fitted red dress, hair perfectly pinned, standing beneath a floral archway, raising a glass. "To the woman who made me who I am," Linda declared. "To my mother, my rock, my best friend." Applause roared from the crowd. Someone whistled. There were string lights overhead, a 6-tier cake at the center of the table, and guests dressed in their best. Servers carried trays of champagne. A band played softly behind the cheers. And yet, in all that noise, not one voice asked, "Where is the woman we are celebrating?" No one mentioned Emma. She lowered the volume and watched in silence, her hands trembling not from sorrow, but from stillness, the kind of stillness that came after you had cried all the tears you had and realized they changed nothing. The video panned to Bella, sitting at the end of a long table, her face pale. She looked down at her plate, untouched. Then, for a moment, her eyes darted toward the camera, as if searching. That night, long after the lights had dimmed and the guests had left, Emma heard a knock at the door. She shuffled slowly to open it, her breath catching when she saw Bella, barefoot and holding her heels in one hand. "Can I stay a little?" Bella whispered. Without a word, Emma stepped aside. They sat on the couch together, the old cushions dipping under their weight. Bella leaned into her grandmother's side and buried her face in her sweater. "I saw you," Bella choked, "watching the live stream. I saw you looking at the cake." "It was a beautiful cake," Emma said quietly. "It was wrong," Bella said. "All of it. She called it your birthday but never said your name. You were a ghost to her." Emma reached over and gently touched Bella's hair. "Sometimes people celebrate themselves in other people's names. I wanted to speak up. I did, but I am not strong enough yet." Emma nodded. "You will be, one day." They sat in silence for a while, the only sound the ticking of the kitchen clock. Then Emma stood and walked to her drawer. She returned with a small velvet pouch. She opened it, revealing a thin silver bracelet, its charm shaped like a swallow in flight. "This was given to me when I was your age," she said, "by someone who told me I'd need to remember who I was when others tried to tell me who I should be." She took Bella's hand and placed the bracelet in her palm. "When you turn 18, she said softly, "you'll receive something else, something bigger. But you must promise me one thing." Bella looked up, eyes wide. "Do not tell anyone," Emma continued. "Not your mother, not your friends. Keep this between us." "Why?" "Because silence protects what love gives. And freedom," her voice grew gentle, "freedom needs secrecy until you are strong enough to defend it." Bella nodded slowly, closing her fingers around the bracelet. "I promise." Emma kissed the top of her head. Outside, the last string lights flickered off. The party was over, the noise was gone. But inside, in that small, quiet living room, something real had just begun. Emma's strength waned with the autumn light. The days grew shorter, and so did her breath. Her body, once sharp and precise like her memory, had begun to slow, to stiffen, to fold into itself like a letter no one opened anymore. Emily noticed first. "She needs quiet now," she said to Dr. Miller. "Not machines, not IVs, just space to rest." Miller nodded. "I'll write the transfer recommendation. I know a home that's quiet, respectful. They'll take her." By the end of the week, Emma was moved to a small private room in a care facility on the edge of town, one with lavender walls, hand-knitted blankets, and no television. Just birdsong from the windows and the occasional piano from the rec room downstairs. Emily came every evening after her shift to check in. Sometimes she brought flowers, other times just her presence. And once a week, usually just before sunset, Bella slipped in quietly through the garden gate, a hoodie pulled over her head and her backpack slung low. "I brought jelly cups," she whispered one time, peeking in. "Don't let the nurse see," Emma teased. "They'll confiscate them. They'll have to fight me." They giggled like conspirators. These visits were brief, tender, and full of unspoken things. Bella never stayed long. She would hold her grandmother's hand, talk about school, or read quietly beside the bed. Emma never asked for more, just that she came. But peace never lasted long in families like hers. Somehow word had spread. Maybe it was the hospital clerk. Maybe a loose-tongued lawyer's assistant. Maybe one of her children had finally gotten curious about her finances, but within days the calls began. At first they were hesitant. "Mom? Just checking in. How are you feeling?" Then came the guilt. "We should visit, you know, as a family. Maybe bring some food. We miss you." And finally the panic. "Did you really change the will? Why? Did someone pressure you? You weren't thinking clearly, were you?" She did not answer any of them. She let the messages pile up in her voicemail, their voices growing more frantic by the hour. Then one afternoon she heard it. Footsteps racing down the hall, followed by raised voices at the front desk. "Let me see her. That's my mother." It was Linda. The door to Emma's room remained closed. From inside she could hear the muffled sobs, the banging on the hallway wall. "Mom, can you change your will? For me? For us? You can't leave us like this." There was a pause. Then the sound of the nurse gently intercepting. "I'm sorry. She's resting. She asked not to be disturbed. Tell her we still love her. Please, just ask her to see us one last time." Inside the room, Emma's eyes remained closed. She did not cry. She did not stir. When the nurse entered quietly and repeated the daughter's message, Emma opened her eyes and spoke calmly. "Tell her," she said, "that I did rewrite something once. Not the will, my trust. And that trust is now where it belongs." The nurse hesitated. "Would you like to say it yourself?" "No, she won't hear me. She'll only hear what she wants." That night, as the sun set over the quiet hills, Emma looked out the window at the soft pink clouds. Bella had just left, leaving behind a folded paper crane on the nightstand. Emma reached for it, held it to her heart, and whispered, "Some things are too late to fix, but not too late to protect." The morning of Emma's funeral arrived gray and muted, as if the weather itself had agreed to be quiet. There was no printed program, no slideshow, no exaggerated eulogies read by unfamiliar voices. Just a modest pine casket, a small circle of chairs, and a faded notebook placed gently on top, its cover soft from years of use. No music played. No one cried loudly. Most of the mourners were staff from the care home, and a few older neighbors who remembered Emma from her walks to the corner store. Her children arrived late. Linda wore dark sunglasses, though the sky was overcast. Her brothers stood stiffly behind her, looking around as if surprised at the lack of crowd. "There's no podium?" one of them asked the director. "No flowers?" "She wanted it this way," the director replied softly. "Quiet. Simple. No speeches." There was murmuring, a few exchanged glances, but no objections. After a short silence, Mr. Alden stepped forward. The lawyer, dressed plainly in a navy suit, held a leather folder in one hand and a sealed envelope in the other. "If I may," he began, his voice calm, unwavering. "Per Mr. Kingston's written request, I have been asked to read a portion of her final testament aloud." The chairs creaked as the family leaned in. Alden opened the folder and cleared his throat. She wrote, "On the day of my 70th birthday, I was not invited to my own celebration. I watched through a screen as others raised glasses in my name, while I sat alone with no chair at the table. Therefore, let this be clear. If there was no seat for me then, there will be no reward now. My gift, too, will be withheld from those who withheld their presence." A silence fell over the room, heavy, brittle. Linda's mouth tightened. Alden continued, turning the page. "The estate, comprising the house, savings, and remaining investments, has been divided as follows. 70% will be donated to the National Eldercare Foundation. 10% will be given to Emily Tran. 10% to Dr. Aaron Miller." At the mention of their names, Emily, seated quietly at the back, bowed her head. Dr. Miller, beside her, blinked slowly but did not react otherwise. Linda stood abruptly. "This is outrageous. She was manipulated. She was clear," Alden interjected calmly. "The will was updated over a year ago, legally certified with witnesses. She was of sound mind. But where her children?" She addressed that as well. Alden held up another page. "My children will not receive inheritance for the same reason one does not water a plant that never grew roots. Presents not blood, defines legacy. The silence that followed was colder than the wind. After a moment, Alden gently placed the sealed envelope on the casket. His voice softened. There is, however, one portion of her estate that remains unannounced, at her request. It will be revealed when the intended recipient reaches the age she believed would make them ready not just to receive, but to understand. Linda scoffed. Another charity? Alden looked at her. Not quite. He offered no further explanation. When the ceremony ended, most left without speaking. There was no luncheon, no after-teas gathering, just the sound of gravel under departing heels. Emily lingered behind, placing a single daisy on the casket. Dr. Miller rested the old notebook gently beside it, its final page folded. Inside, in faded ink, Emma had written one last sentence. Let truth, not titles, determine what we leave behind. 1 year later, spring came gently to the hills outside the quiet care home where Emma had spent her final days. The cherry trees in the garden had begun to bloom again, their petals drifting like soft memories across the walkways. Emily and Dr. Miller arrived just after noon. They did not come for any ceremony. There were no speeches, no cameras, no plaques or donations, just a small bouquet of wildflowers, picked from the field behind the hospice, and a tin of ginger cookies that Emma used to sneak during her last weeks, her fingers trembling, her eyes lit up with mischief. She would have scolded me for eating all the good ones, Emily said with a small smile, placing the tin on the windowsill beside Emma's old chair. Miller, standing just behind her, chuckled. She would have eaten the first 3 herself and claimed she was rationing the rest. That was their ritual. Every May 6th, without fail, they returned to the place where Emma had breathed her last, where her laughter had once echoed in the halls, and her silence had spoken louder than any sermon. They never stayed long, just long enough to say hello to the nurses who still remembered Emma, to sit in her garden, to refill the bird feeder she had insisted be kept full even in her final days, to read aloud from her favorite poetry collection, and to bring cookies. No one from Emma's family had visited since the funeral. They'd come once, out of obligation more than grief, nodding through the service, checking their watches between condolences. But Miller and Emily, Emma's friends, not by blood but by choice, had kept the promise they made at her bedside. "We'll remember you," Emily had whispered, holding Emma's hand as her breath slowed. "Not with monuments, with presence." Emma had smiled faintly. "That's all I want." So every year they returned, not for grand gestures, but for the small ones that mattered. That afternoon, they helped serve tea to the newer residents. Emily read a few pages from the notebook Emma had kept, her voice calm and reverent. Miller helped a man in a wheelchair adjust his blanket. They laughed softly, they cried quietly, and when the sun began to set, they left the cookies on the windowsill and walked away without a word. Across town, in a quiet office filled with old books and framed degrees, a young woman sat nervously across from Mr. Alden, Emma's lawyer. Her name was Bella. She had just turned 18. She wore a plain white blouse tucked into faded jeans, and her hair was pulled back in a neat ponytail. In her lap she held a small canvas bag. In her hands, a letter, folded and worn from being opened and refolded so many times, the creases had become part of the paper. It was the last thing Emma had given her before she died. Bella had waited for this meeting, not because she expected an inheritance or answers, but because she missed Emma's voice, missed her scent, her quiet encouragement, the way she always remembered what Bella was reading or dreaming of. "She wanted me to give you this," Mr. Alden said gently, sliding a sealed envelope across the desk. Bella's hands trembled as she opened it. Inside was an official document, typed, notarized, legally binding. A full scholarship fund, established in her name. Tuition, housing, books, and travel, all expenses covered for any medical program she chose, anywhere in the world. Bella's lips parted slightly. She stared at the paper, unable to breathe for a moment, and then she saw it. Tucked behind the document, folded twice, was a handwritten note. Faded ink, familiar cursive. "You are the only gentle thing I had in my final chapter. Use this to heal others, but never let anyone treat you like a tool. Learn well, live freely, and never, ever love someone who forgets to ask how your day was." Bella pressed the note to her chest. She didn't care about the money. Not really. It was the words, the presence behind them, the memory of being seen. Tears slid down her cheeks, unhidden. Mr. Alden waited respectfully, allowing her the silence she needed. Outside, the city moved on. Buses rolled by, a man yelled into his phone, children argued over ice cream flavors. Somewhere, someone was late for something. But inside that room, warm with dust and memory, a young woman sat, wrapped in the final love letter of a woman who had no obligation to her, only devotion. Emma had never been a grandmother by blood. Bella was not her descendant. But they had found each other. And in the soft hours of Emma's decline, Bella had read to her, combed her hair, rubbed her hands with lotion, and told her stories about college applications and early dreams of being a doctor. In turn, Emma had taught Bella how to listen, how to grieve without guilt, how to love without possession. Bella had not been forgotten. She had been remembered with intention, with care, with a kind of love that asked for nothing in return and gave everything in silence. When Bella stepped out into the street, the light was golden. People rushed past her. No one knew that something sacred had just been handed down. No one knew the quiet legacy a dying woman had left behind, not in wealth, but in wisdom. She paused at a bus stop, opened her phone, and searched for a clinic that accepted volunteers. If you've ever felt invisible in your own family, like a shadow at birthdays, a whisper during holidays, remember this. True love doesn't need a spotlight. Emma didn't need confetti or long apologies. She needed truth. She needed presence. And Bella, the girl who showed up without being asked, who offered her time, her laughter, and her unwavering softness, was the last light she held on to. We think legacy means statues or big names, but sometimes it's a single note, a tin of cookies, a scholarship written in memory and marked by love. If this story reached somewhere inside you, if it stirred a memory or a tear, or if it reminded you of someone you once cared for and never got to thank, then I ask you, share this story with someone who believes in quiet strength. Leave a comment if you've ever been held by someone not related to you. Subscribe to Incredible Love Stories, where silence speaks, kindness remembers, and even the softest hearts leave the loudest legacy. Because sometimes, strangers hold us closer than our blood ever did. And sometimes, the ones we whisper to are the only ones who truly listen.